So right here, the problem would be stating to find the domain and the range, and then graph this function. So finding the domain, the question you got to ask yourself is, do you feel lucky? Well, or do I feel lucky? Well, do you? Whatever. I actually haven't seen that movie. Anyway, the question that you have to ask yourself is, what is not allowed in some specific spot? So for square roots, we're not allowed to have negatives inside the square root. Okay, and you think, wait, there's a negative there. But if x was a negative, then the inside would be a negative times a negative, so it would become positive. So it's still okay, because we don't know what x is. So for square roots, the inside cannot be negative. It's allowed to be 0, but it cannot be negative. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the inside. If it can't be negative, what's the inside? That's negative x. That's the inside. And if it cannot be negative, I'm going to force it to be positive, which means I'll force it to be greater than 0. Actually, it's allowed to be 0 as well, so I'll say greater than or equal to 0. And then, wait a minute. Nope, this is right. I got confused for a second, because watch. So I'm saying it's greater than or equal to 0. To find the domain, I just solve for x. So let's see what happens. I'll divide by -1. Anytime you divide by a negative, you got to switch the sign around, remember? So that's what I was confused about, because I was thinking, wait a minute, if you divide by a negative, or if you divide, nothing happens. But yes, something happens. You got to switch the sign around. And that's just still 0. So the domain is any x value that's less than or equal to 0. That's what we just said. If it's negative, then it'll still work out. So that's the domain. Another way you can write it is negative infinity all the way up until 0, including 0. That's what the square bracket is for. Those are the same way, or same answer, just different ways of writing it. So that's the domain. What's the range? The range. Well, that's just wherever, like, what are the possible y values? Okay, let's see. There's a negative out here, no matter what. And the best way for me to figure out the range is I just try, think in my head and plug in stuff. So if I have that negative x, I'm only allowed to plug in negatives or 0. So I can't plug in +1 because that's bigger than 0. So I'll start out, the very first place I can start is do, re, mi, and just 0. I'll plug in that 0 and then see what I get. So y equals negative square root of 0. Well, that's just equal to 0. So the output can be 0. Alright, so that's part of the range. So range includes 0. What if I do -1? What happens? -1, negative times a negative is a positive. So we get +1 as an output. Oh, no, we don't. Right? This becomes +1, square root of +1. And then also it gets multiplied by a negative, so we actually get -1. If we plug in -2, we get actually negative square root of 2. And if we plug in, let's just do an even number, -4, what do we get? We get -2. So this is actually 0 and below. It's all the y values are 0 and below. So this actually has a range which is including 0. So y such that, this is also another way to write it, y such that y is less than or equal to 0. Or you can rewrite it like that. Yeah, that's the range, domain and range. You just gotta think about it. Think about what are the rules. For square roots, you can't have negatives in there. And for the range, just try and plug in stuff. The range is kind of weird unless you have a graph, so you can graph this stuff. If you remember the rules for shifting and stuff, then this would make sense. It's the graph of this. Normally would look like that. That's the square root of x. But we have a negative for the inside, so that means it's reflected about the y-axis. So it would look like that. But then we reflect about the x-axis as well, so it would look like that, which means 0 and then anything negative. All right, that's done for that.